Hey everybody, welcome to the Thursday evening live tutorial stream coming at you from Beading Dreams, now with internet, unlike last night when we had to cancel all of our streams because we had none. No internet, no phones, none of those modern communication
No fun
devices that, make communicating with you all out there on the World Wide Web so much easier. I mean, I could have stood on the roof and just shouted, but I really don't think that would have worked very well, especially for anybody who wasn't on Lover's Lane. Also, I might have gotten arrested. Also, I was forbidden to go on the roof by Carol May. So there's also that.
She did put her foot down.
She did. I was told I was not allowed to go on the roof, nor was I allowed to shinny up the power pole and reconnect the cable. All I have to say about that is my staff is no fun. But
agreed. Yeah.
Welcome to Torch Thursday. I missed you all on last Torch Thursday because I was being a terrible slacker and having a vacation, which was delightful. It was nice to have some time away, but I'm so glad to be back with all of you all for tonight's double bezel cuff tutorial. So this is a fun one because, well, it's a fun one because it involves fire for starters, but I think it's a fun one because I like it. I don't think that the two stones have to actually match, so it's a great use for single stones that you might have lying around that you don't want to make into pendants. So it's not quite as complicated as if you were to make a long drop earring, though that is something else that I kind of want to do. I just need 3 more days in the week so that I can spend at least 2 of them with my torch making things.
Every week should have 3 more days.
Should have 3 more days.
Yes.
It's true.
The Allisonian calendar. I like it.
Yep. Okay, but let's talk tools and supplies for this evening's tutorial. Okay, you're gonna need some sheet metal, and I'm gonna use some 24 gauge sterling silver sheet. As long as your cabochons are not very large, because we all know that this butane, sorry, my soldering board is all up in my camera zone right now. We all know that this butane torch has some issues with size, but as long as your cabs aren't too large, and yeah, that bezel. The bezel on that opal looks a little on the rough side. I'm going to try and do better than that tonight. But anyway, if your cabs aren't too big, you can use something heavier than 24 gauge. Hey Jan Carmen, I like using 24 gauge because I can cut it with the shears, so I don't need to bust out my saw, just because I don't have a permanent bench pin set up, and it's kind of a pain for me to try and saw in my streaming area. So if I can cut something with shears, I prefer to do so. That's why I've got the 24 gauge. You're going to need some bezel strip. I like fine silver bezel, and I'm using 3/32 bezel strip today, and then you're going to need a pair of cabochons, and I'm using these 2 little green glass scarabs. So when you're choosing your bezel wire, you want to make sure that your bezel wire isn't too tall. Okay, you really want it to just barely come up and over the edge of your cabochon. And that is actually why this bezel is so incredibly choppy looking, is because I couldn't find my 3/32 bezel strip when I made this sample, and so I used bezel strip that was way too tall. Tried to set it, it looked horrible, pulled the stone, sanded it down, but obviously didn't do a great job of it, and then tried to set the stone again. So really, what I really should do at this point, if I want this cup to be, saleable, is I should go ahead and pull that opal out, take this off, and just make a whole new bezel for it. But, yay! We get an in-person Jan. That's exciting.
Sweet!
Yeah, so just make sure your bezel strip's not too tall, or you get something that looks crappy like this, is what I'm trying to tell you. For the body of the cup, I used 14 gauge round wire. Just regular round wire. You could use square or half round if you wanted. If you use half round, you definitely want to make sure it's plenty thick. You want to use at least a 10 gauge if you're doing half round, but the 14 gauge should be sufficient for our cuff. And let's talk for a minute about cuffs. Okay, it's really easy to make them too big, and actually this was my second iteration of this bracelet, because the first time I made it ginormous, way too big for myself. So don't forget when you're making a cuff that you need to have a gap in the middle so you can actually put it on and take it off. Usually that gap is 1 inch or so. And then the way that this is constructed, your wire does not overlap the entirety of your bezel. So that means I've got, depending on the size of my cabs, about another 1/2 inch of length that's added here by these bezels. So basically I've got 1.5 inches of length that I need to account for in terms of not making my wire too long. And then also, cuff bracelets, in my opinion, work better if they fit fairly tightly, because if they're too loose, they always tend to kind of flip to the side and get stuck like this, which is not any fun. So you want to base this on a fairly snug wrist measurement. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take my, oh, I didn't do tools. You need all your soldering stuff, plus some various other tools. Also, I'm warm, so buy my sweater. Sorry, Lori. Lori was just shoveling snow.
Well, that'll warm you up too, though.
That is true. Okay, so brief rundown of tools that you're going to need for soldering. You are, of course, going to need a torch. I've got my laser butane, which is my favorite torch. You're going to need a soldering surface. I've got my solder right here, which I will put back under the camera when it's time for me to use that. You're, of course, going to need your hand tools, your pliers. That's going to be a round nose, chain nose, and a wire cutter. We might not use all of those in the project tonight, but it's always just good to have those around. You're going to need a metal shears or a saw. Either one will work. Just depending on what your preference is. You're going to need a file. You're going to need a prong pusher. A bracelet mandrel is helpful. It's not 100% necessary, but a bracelet mandrel is going to help you form your bracelet. This is a steel one, which is always my preference, even though they're more expensive, because number one, you can hammer on them if you need to. Number two, you can whack somebody with them if they're pissing you off. And you're also going to need some fine steel wool. You're going to need flux, pickle, and a pickle pot. We'll talk about what all those things are and what they do when it comes time for us to use them. My flux out was causing a major avalanche. And my pickle and pickle pot is off camera, but I will talk about that when it's time. And probably a lot of other things that I've forgotten. I will tell you what they are when I remember that I have forgotten them. Okay, so back to measuring my wrist. So I'm going to take my tape measure, and I'm just going to take a comfortable but snug wrist measurement. Okay, so I'm not trying to, like, you know, compress my wrist there, but I want it to be fairly snug. So my comfortable but snug wrist measurement is going to be 6 1/4 inches. So remember, I said we have to account for at least 1.5 inches of added length. So 6 1/4 minus 1.5 is going to be 4 3/4. Yes, 4 3/4. That is how long I need to cut my wire, and that's going to sound really, really short. And I promise, thank you, tape measure. I promise it's not going to be. And the reason I know that is because I did that with this prototype. I did that math, and I said, that's way too short to make a bracelet. And I cut it 1 inch longer, and it was ginormous. So 4 3/4 inches. Now, I actually wound up sizing down the giant one, because I thought it was too giant for most people's, including you.
Including me?
Yes.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
I'm giant.
Your wrists are not giant, and neither is the rest of you. Okay, 4 3/4. Cut that, and I'm just going to set that piece of wire aside. I'm not going to need that for a little bit yet, because I'm going to start by making my bezels. Now, once again, since our torch has size issues, I'm going to take my sheet.
Poor torch.
I know. I think this is like a 3 inch by 2 inch piece of sterling sheet, and I'm just going to cut off a little strip. That's the width of my cabochons, and that's what I'm going to use for my project tonight. And if I want to, if I could find my dividers, I could use them to cut to mark a straight line on my metal, but since I can't seem to find them, it appears I'm just going to have to wing it. I wonder where they went.
What you need?
My dividers.
Oh, yeah, I don't know where those.
Sorry.
It wasn't me, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It wasn't Heather.
This time.
This time. Who knows? They're probably staring me right in the face. But I'm just going to wing it. Go the old-fashioned route and use a straight edge and a marker. Is this exciting, watching me cut metal? I know that's what y'all wanted to do tonight.
It is, because we can finally watch you.
That's true. The reason I am taking some pains to cut a straight line here is because sometimes it's really helpful to have a straight edge on your metal. And I have no idea what project I'm going to do with this metal next. So, you know, it's just a good habit to have. But you don't have to. If you want to cut a wonky line, you cut your wonky line. You do you.
Sometimes my lines are wonky without my consent.
Well, that's a different problem. So then I'm just going to use my metal shears and I'm gonna cut this. So these are, for anybody who hasn't ever used metal shears before, these are a really nice pair. These are made by Eurotool. I don't even know if we can get these anymore, honestly. They seem to be getting harder and harder to find. They're my faves.
They still have them at Eurotool.
Okay, but there are a lot of other metal shears out there that you can get that work fairly well. This one just cuts through the metal like butter, and I love it.
It's the greatest.
And it's good for doing curves as well. Okay, so now I have my piece of metal, and I want to go ahead and flatten that out, which means that I need two tools that I did not mention. I need a bench block, and I need a rawhide mallet, one of which I have in my streaming area, and one of which I don't. So I will be right back. Do you want Ziggy Stardust or Heather?
Oh my.
I'm waiting for the votes to come in.
They always want me.
All right, here's Heather.
Hello! I was totally prepared for this.
Your hair looks super cute. You should show it off.
Okay, my hair looks super cute and I should show it off, says my boss. So I like to listen to her. So how's everybody doing? I got to have a visit this weekend from my nieces and my brother and sister-in-law and my nephew dog and my niece dog, and it was amazing. I am so full of love right now, so it was awesome.
Yay! See, you got heartwarming Heather. And I got a bench block, so this is a win-win situation. So since I'm going to be doing a bezel with this, it is supremely important. I cannot stress enough how important it is that this metal be flat. Currently, it is not flat, because this is what happens when you cut with the shears, is it will warp your metal. So I'm just going to put it on my bench block and grab my rawhide mallet. I'm using a rawhide mallet because I don't want to put any texture on the surface. Also, you'll notice that I did label this in Sharpie, and I don't need to worry about taking that off, because in all of the 20,000 steps that we're going to be doing to this tonight, the Sharpie is going to go away. Hi, Aso! How's everything? I've missed you stream people so much.
I know,
So
me too.
I'm going to take my rawhide mallet and I'm just going to pound this flat. And then I'm going to flip this over, pound it on the other side. Speaking of missing people and missing all of your smiling, or, you know, not smiling, you don't have to smile, I'm not going to be that person, faces, we have our Zoom Crafty Cocktail Hour tomorrow night from 6 to 8, and that means you will not find us on Facebook, you will not find us on Twitch, you will find us on Zoom. Crafting, I've got a buttload of soldering to do, so I'm 100% going to be soldering tomorrow night on Zoom. I have a buttload plus an ass ton, and I think maybe a shitload on top of that.
Wow.
That is how much soldering I have to do.
That's a lot of soldering.
It's a lot of soldering. Yeah. So, including a spider for Heather.
Yay!
So there will definitely be soldering on Zoom tomorrow night on my end.
Well, if the spider ends up falling off due to other priorities.
Down the
That's
water
okay.
Water spout?
Yes, because
Or up
out
the
came
water
the wind and washed the internet out.
Oh, there is that, but I don't think that has anything to do with me not, you know, getting my soldering projects done. Ooh, that is very, very chunky. BRB, need water. I'm not going to make you tell another story.
I have other stories.
Oh, there's not water there anymore.
Oh, there isn't. It's true. I tried that earlier.
Yes, so we've been having a very tumultuous relationship with Ozarka, our water delivery service, due to the fact that they basically refused to come during our open hours and pick up all of our empty bottles. And so empty water bottles, 5-gallon bottles, have just been piling up in our not over generously large back room. And called them multiple times. They promised they would come, you know, after 1 p.m. to drop off and pick up the empties, and then the day before they had promised to come after 1 p.m. I showed up at 10 a.m. to 3 5-gallon bottles of water outside the door, and no Ozarka truck to be seen.
Good grief.
And then there was just so much runaround and rigmarole that finally I decided that we were done with Ozarka, and that they just needed to come pick up their water cooler and our empty bottles, and you know, we were done here closing our account. So they said they were going to do that on November the 12th, and they didn't. And they finally showed up on Monday.
So they said they were going to do it in October and didn't. And
right,
then November.
And then November. And they finally showed up on Monday, the 15th, to take away the water cooler. And so now there's not a water cooler there, and I'm having to get used to that. We will get another one, we just haven't yet. So anyway, that was a weird and rambling story that has nothing to do with soldering. So let's go ahead and...
It has a little to do with the flux, though.
That's true. Let's go ahead and make some bezels. So I'm going to take my cabochons, and are you guys the same size? Not really. One of them's a little bit plumper, I think, than the other. So this is always one of the fun things when you're making bezels, is you gotta, especially if your things are the same shape. That's another reason that something like this project here is good, because they're not the same shape. It's easy to keep track of them. But I'm going to do my best to keep track of which bezel goes with which bug. And I'm just going to snip off a piece of this. So the bezel strip is very, very malleable. Extremely malleable. So I'm just going to take that and I'm going to form it around my little scarab here. Like so. I want a tight fit. Okay, tight fit is your goal in bezel making. I'm going to grab that marker that I put away that I shouldn't have put away. That is true.
So it really shouldn't have been that big a deal. And yet.
And yet, it was the biggest of big deals.
It was. But they didn't pick up our empties because we chucked them in the dumpster.
Right.
And they're going to charge us for those because they didn't come pick them up on time, and your mom would have been mad.
Well, to be fair, they're not going to charge us as much for the empties as for the water cooler.
That's fair.
That. And they actually said, because Carol May did find out, if we had chucked just thrown everything in the dumpster, water cooler, empties, everything, it only would have cost us $100.
Well,
so
that's good, especially since it was a broken water cooler.
Yes. Well, now
it was a water heater.
Now they have it back, and all is, you know,
well in Ozarka land.
Well in Ozarka land, and I just need to order a new water cooler so that we can use the full bottles of water that they would not take back, because they do not take back nor give refunds on full bottles of water, even if you're closing your account. So, you know, all told, not very happy with my experience with Ozarka. But once again, really
they were great for so long,
and
then
anything to do with soldering. Okay,
not.
so this is my bezel for this guy. I think I cut it a little bit big. Do you see? There's this gap right there. No, come back. I don't want that. That's from where I was. Wow, that was a lot of words that tried to come out at the same time. Where I had it overlapped. So I'm just going to snip a little bit of that off, and then I am going to have to file this a little bit to line it up. just going to nip that a little bit off and say that goes with this one, and then I'm going to take my other one. I'm going to do the same thing. And I don't know why it's so daggone bright on my camera. There. It wasn't before I got on stream. Alright, so we're going to wrap that around.
It probably got inspired by my seeming nakedness over here. I was like, oh, that's how bright you want it. You want to look like you might be dying. Okay, cool.
You look like you might be trapped on a desert planet.
Yeah, I got you, fam, is what they said.
Okay, so I've got that around my stone. I'm going to mark it. I'm going to cheat my mark over a little bit so I don't have to recut it this time. And I'm just going to do the best I can to snip that straight with my shears. Okay, so now we come to, of course, everybody's favorite part of every fabrication project, which is filing. Doesn't everyone love filing? Heather, don't you love filing?
I just did quite a lot of filing, actually. Yes. I do love filing when I'm done with it.
There you go. So, since solder will not flow across a gap, and since you don't have a perfectly flat surface from your metal shears, we just need to take a file. We need to smooth out the ends of these wires so that we can get that perfectly flush joint that we need in order to solder. So I'm just going to take a flat file and I'm going to ride it right against the edge of that wire. I'm actually going to go this way because I don't want to hit this back wire. I just want to flatten that out, and if you've got a nice sharp file, it shouldn't take that many strokes because this wire is very, very thin. And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on this side. And then we're going to do what's called a tension fit. And in tension fitting, all you're going to do is you're going to take the ends of your bezel and you're going to manipulate them past each other so that they will then snap together and hold themselves in place without you having to hold them in place. And what's oftentimes helpful in this situation is to take your chain nose pliers and give that a squish. Like so. Line it up. Take your glasses off. Ooh, wow, I did not do a good job of that at all. Sorry, y'all. Apparently, this is where I need to hold this in order to do this. Let's try that again. Again, I'm sure this is the most interesting thing on Twitch this evening. Me right here, squinting at my metal, trying to get it to line up. Okay, so this is a solidly solderable joint that I have made here. So it's lined up, it's flush, there's a teeny little gap, but it's close enough that my solder will flow on it. So now I want to do the same thing with my other bezel. So once again, I'm going to file this. I'm just going to go ahead and file this over here because obviously if I try to do it under the camera, does not work. I will say if you fabricate a lot, a good file is well worth the investment. Cannot say that enough. Because I resisted good files for many, many years. I was like, I've got cheap files, they work just fine. And then I got a good file because I needed it for a workshop. And oh my god, the difference, like, I was a convert then, I've never turned back from good files since then. Okay, so now I'm going to tension fit this. Now, I put this joint at a really awkward spot. Like, it's really, really going to be hard for me to tension fit and solder that. So here's a trick, is at this point, this bezel doesn't need to be any particular shape, because we're going to form it around our stone before we solder it down to the back plate. So all I did is I just bent it around to make this kind of wonky D shape, but now my edges of my bezel are coming more straight into each other, and that makes it so incredibly much easier to do my tension fit now we're going to solder these bezels closed. So, good lord, I really do need a new soldering board. And also not more light. Okay, so I'm going to take my bezels and I'm just going to plop them on my solder board. Preferably in the camera range and not outside of the camera range. Or camera area. There we go. And I'm going to flux them. So, flux is a paste. It can also be a liquid, it can also be a gel, it can also be a sprayed liquid. So there are lots of different fluxes out there. The paste is my favorite. This is Handy Flux. What the flux does is it prevents your metal from oxidizing when you heat it. If you don't flux your metal, what happens when you heat it is it's going to turn black. The problem, of course, is that black oxide layer is going to prevent your solder from flowing, and we don't want that. So we're going to take some sterling silver. Wow, talk about being unprepared. So we're going to locate some sterling silver medium solder, which I swear I had in my drawer, but I don't. None of you are medium. Well, we'll do it with easy and gray. Okay, so the reason that you want to use medium solder for this is because this project has several different joints. And so you always want to start with a harder solder, with a higher melting point solder, to do your first couple of joints. That way you are not running the risk of opening them back up when you do your subsequent joints, because theoretically if you use a higher melting point of solder, you're never going to have to get your metal hot enough to reopen those joints and mess up what you've already done. Now that being said, since the second thing we're going to do is zip the bezels, we're actually going to go straight from medium to extra easy and then back to easy for soldering our bracelet on, which is a little bit out of sequence, but it's because zipping that bezel is really difficult. So by using extra easy solder, you can make it absolutely as easy on yourself as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to go get medium and extra easy solder. So, sorry y'all. I need to re-zip tie that grid because I just basically knocked it over.
Okay.
Oh, cat helpers. They're so cute and so incredibly not helpful. But they're cute, which sometimes in and of itself is helpful. Alright, there's medium and extra easy. So I keep track of my solders by marking the ends with different little bend configurations. So my easy is a single bend, my medium is a double bend, and my extra easy is a coil, which means I need my round nose pliers. I don't know where they are. So that's what, oh, there they are. Okie dokie. Alright, so now that I have all the solder I need, let's go ahead and just real quick have Allison's very brief 5-point soldering safety lecture designed to keep you and the people in your home or community workspace safe while soldering. So, number one, try and keep, as best you can, a 6 to 8 inch distance that is clear around your torch flame. Do as I say, not as I do. Both of my lights and my camera are way closer than 6 inches for the purposes of showing you all what I am doing. Don't do that. Don't do that unless you absolutely have to, as is evidenced by the fact that I melted a webcam late last year. So to avoid meltage of expensive equipment or setting on fire of things, also interesting fact, after something's melted, a lot of times it will then catch on fire. 6 to 8 inches of clear space around your soldering area at all times. Once you've had a flame going in your workspace from that point forward, always assume that everything in your workspace is hot enough to burn you, because it probably is. Tweezers are your friend when it comes to picking up hot objects. Tweezers. Number 3, ventilation is important. If you find yourself coughing, hacking, or wheezing, or feeling otherwise uncomfortable in the lung area after you've been soldering, you may want to re-examine your ventilation situation. Number 4, if you are not actively using your torch, turn it off. These torches are very easy to light, very easy to extinguish. There's absolutely no reason at all that you should leave your torch burning and walk away from it. If you do, bad things might happen involving possibly cats. Just saying. And number 5, make sure that you always know where your fire extinguisher is. If you're doing this at home, you should have a fire extinguisher within arm's reach. If you're doing this in a community workspace, make sure you know where their fire extinguisher is. And of course, especially if you're working in a community workspace, make sure you comply with all instructions posted or verbal from, the people who are supervising the session. I promise nobody's trying to get on your ass. They're just trying to keep everybody safe. So now that we've had that, we're going to go ahead and light some torch. I'm going to start by cutting 2 itty-bitty teeny-weeny pieces of medium solder. And when I say itty-bitty teeny-weeny, I mean very, very small. About 1 millimeter is a good size in order to not overfill the joints and make them blobby. So I'm going to take my piece of solder, and then I'm going to take my joint, and I'm going to set it on top of my piece of solder, like so. And I can go ahead and do the same on my other. Alright, there we go. Now I'm going to light the torch, heat them, and flow the solder. So I'm just going to take my torch, I'm going to go slowly and steadily around my metal, heating it. Alright, you just saw my flux react and get white and then clear. That means that I've got my metal hot enough for my solder to flow. Almost immediately thereafter, my solder did flow. My joint's a little misaligned, so I'm going to see if I can correct that with my tweezers. By just reflowing my solder and squeezing that into place. There we go, much better. Alright, so that is 1 soldered bezel. Now we're going to go for number 2. Again, that one's also a little misaligned. You can see from the top. Also, be careful when you're doing this that you don't melt the other side of your bezel, okay? This metal is very delicate, it's very thin, it's fragile, it's easy to melt. You don't want to melt the metal, you want to melt the solder, not the same thing. There we go. Alright, so there we go. I'm going to let those cool for a minute, and then we are going to, and of course I lost my little righty-lefty distinction that I had going there, so we're just going to have to wing it. So once these cool enough, for me to touch them, which they have, I'm going to take my little scarabs and I'm just going to pop the bezel around the scarab, and ideally, like I said, we want a tight fit, and we don't really want any air gaps on the back. And you can even kind of roll your cabochons on your work surface a little bit to sort of form the bezel to them. Now, you're not trying to form this top part over yet, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to form the bottom part here tightly against the stone. So let's see, did I choose correctly? Are you righty or are you lefty? Should try switching them just for grins. I think you're actually righty and you're lefty. Yeah, that's a better fit. ahead and form that as best you can around your stone. So again, what you're looking for a tight fit here on the bottom. You're looking for it to mimic the shape of the stone. If you've got a little wobble like that, that's where grabbing something, even like a bench block, and sort of rolling your stone on there is helpful. So just kind of press out that wobbly bit. Alright, so I think that one is as good as it's going to get, and I'm going to work on this one. It isn't as tight a fit, which makes it actually harder to form. You don't have that tension against the stone, but I think we're going to go with that one's not bad as well. Okay, so I've got 2 of my little bezels. Not the neatest bezels ever, but they are not bad. How's it going there, Heather?
I think AARP was right.
Okay, so now I'm going to take these bezels and I'm going to do what's called zipping them down to the back plate. And so when I'm zipping a bezel, again, it's just as important that the bezel is flat as it is that the back plate is flat. So I'm going to take my bezel, I'm going to put it on some sandpaper, and I'm just going to move that back and forth on the sandpaper to just sand down the surface of that bezel until you have a nice flat surface. And during this process it may get deformed. That's okay, we can reform it around our stones, like roll deformed like that. Definitely not the shape of my stone. But it's okay, we'll reform this around the stone before we solder it down. Once you solder it down to the back plate, then you can't change the shape at all. Alright, so now I'm going to reform these around the respective little guys. Also going to try not to choke on stream.
Oh dear. You've already done that.
I have already done that, it's true. Very dramatically. We're going to try not to do that again. Okay, so at this point I want to be very gentle with this because I'm about to solder this down to my back plate, and again, after that point you cannot change the shape, so you really want to make sure that your shape is correct. And that you don't squish it or compress it or change it in any way between now and the time you get it soldered down. Alright, so there are my 2 bezels. I'm going to grab that 24 gauge wire and my soldering board. I'm going to zip these puppies down.
You tell them who's boss.
I'm going to try. They might
It's
tell
you.
me who's boss.
No, it's you. You're always the boss.
I don't know. When I'm zipping bezels, sometimes the bezels are the boss.
Fair.
I'm just going to lay these onto that little strip of sheet metal.
Zipping anything has...
There. Alright. So they're going to go there. I'm going to flux the whole thing. Which I actually should have done before I put them down. Whoops. There we go. Okay, and then I'm going to cut 4 pieces of extra easy solder. Sorry, that's a little too much light. 4 pieces of extra... Okay, fine. You just go with 4 pieces of extra easy solder for each bezel. I'm going to put them at the 4 compass points. And I'm cutting bigger pieces of solder this time. Technically you don't need to, but it always makes me feel better because zipping bezels is difficult, and I have the erroneous notion that if I use more solder that makes it easier. It's not true. Okay, let me just put, for all the real metalsmiths out there, I know that is not a true assumption, but it makes me feel better anyway. So it's my stream and that's how I'm doing it.
You tell them.
I was gonna say real metalsmiths can laugh at me all they want to.
You do you, Honey Boo. Not Honey Boo Boo, that's different.
Right.
It's not you. At all.
So I just want to kind of snug these up so that they're sitting right on the point where the plate meets the border that the bezel kind of made. And this is one of those tedious things that is an utter pain in the butt. I promise it's worth the time to do it right. And then you do that and you just bump it and you gotta start all over. Because why not?
That's what my stuff usually says. Why not start over?
I actually did cut these pieces really big, so I'm going to try and go with 3 pieces instead of 4. I think I went a little excessive in my neurosis in this particular instance. Okay, so now let's see if we can get these babies to solder down. Take a torch. You're going to heat everything. And sometimes your flux will boil and move all those pieces of solder that you painstakingly positioned to completely different places, which is just the awesomest thing ever. But you can shove them back into place with your tweezers. Alright, so once your flux is all turned clear, that means that your metals reach the temperature where your solder can conceivably flow. So now we're going to concentrate on this outside joint and see if we can get the solder to zip. By zip, I mean I want it to flow in between the bezel and the back plate and solder it down. There we go. Okay, so what I'm seeing, that the way that I know it's zipping, and you may have seen, you can actually kind of see on camera, the solder moving, is basically it'll make a line and it'll flow around. You can actually follow the flow of that line. Now we're going to see if we can get that to happen up here as well. Alright, well, we got a good start to our zip. Good, good. I'm a little concerned about this area right here. It doesn't look to me like that area is completely soldered down. This is where you gotta be careful of a couple things. Number one, you gotta be careful not to melt your fake nails, which I didn't.
What else didn't you
I only
melt?
did a little bit.
Which you only did a little bit.
and secondly, you gotta be careful not to melt the actual bezel itself.
And also your webcam.
And also your webcam. So basically, the only thing you should be melting in this instance is the solder.
That's fair. Seems like a reasonable.
But when you start to kind of hyper-focus on one area like this, that's when it kind of becomes dangerous, for me at least, because I forget that there are other parts of my bezel that are vulnerable to being melted, and this is when I will oftentimes inadvertently, melt the part of my bezel that is directly across from where I'm trying to solder, because I forget that there's, overspill. Oh wow, I kind of melted 2 of my nails, that's exciting.
Hey!
There's overspill from the flame that goes across the bezel, so just be careful of that. Okay, so now I need to let this cool. If I was a smart person, I would have some quench water here, but I don't. A good trick if you don't have quench water, but you're impatient like me, and you want your piece to cool down a little bit more quickly, is if you put it onto your bench block, the metal will leach the heat out from your bezel a little bit more quickly than just leaving it on any other surface. So once this is cool enough for me to touch it, which it is, I'm going to take my metal shears and I'm going to cut out around the outside of each of these bezels. I should probably double check and just make sure that it did in fact zip all the way around. connected. Yeehaw.
Yeah.
And here we go. So just cut as close to the joint of the bezel and the back plate as possible with your metal shears. The more closely you cut, the less filing you're going to have to do to get this to look clean. Obviously you don't want to like cut off your bezel though, that's not desirable, but as close as you can get is good. Alright, so there's one. So that's usually about as close as I can get with my cutting, and then I'm going to use my file to clean up all the rest of that. If you're having trouble getting your bezel to zip, there are a couple of tricks you can use. Number one, of course, make sure that everything is flat. Make sure that your back plate is flat. Make sure that your bezel is flat, because that's the most important thing. If there's not contact, it's not going to go. Number two, make sure that everything is clean. If you've been at this for a while, so I'm just going to take my file and I'm going to clean up these edges. But if you've been at it for a while trying to get it to zip, a lot of times you get a lot of oxide buildup underneath that bezel, and then that's going to prevent your solder from flowing. So, you know, try pickling, rinsing it off, and then trying again. If that doesn't work, you may be having size issues related to your torch. Make sure you're using absolutely the lowest melting point solder that you can. Typically that's extra easy. And then also removing some metal will help the problem. So if you're having trouble zipping your bezel on a big rectangle like I did, cut 2 smaller rectangles. If you're still having trouble, you know, round off the corners. Get it as close to the size of your bezel as possible. If that still doesn't work, you can actually remove some metal from the middle as well. I could totally saw out an oval in the middle here, and that would even make make less metal for me to deal with. So these are all tricks to help you work with the butane torch and still do slightly larger pieces. So see, I'm just filing this flush so that what I have is a smooth flush surface from my bezel to my back plate, so that it basically looks like one thing rather than 2 things that have been soldered together. So as I continue filing, I'm going to talk to you guys about next week on the Beading Dreams stream. It is the week of Thanksgiving, meaning it is the week of our 50% off sale here in the Beading Dreams store and on the Beading Dreams stream. We're going to be doing 3 sales. Next week, we are going to be doing Wednesday night, a sale starting at 6 p.m. It's going to be 50% off strands of beads. I'm going to have piles and piles and piles of strands of beads that we are going to be selling at 50% off. Plus, we might do Indian beads at something like $1 a strand, because some of them really have got to go out of here.
You're saying we don't need a full wall?
I'm saying we don't need a full wall of the glass beads. We really don't. But yeah, so Wednesday, 6 p.m. to 8, 9. It depends on how tired Heather and I are and how much I talk, as usual. But 50% off strands on Wednesday. Thursday is Thanksgiving. I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be eating not turkey, but hopefully prime rib roast and corn pudding and stuffing myself and being fat. Well, 50% off next week, Corvus, not this week. We'll be back with another sale on Friday. Friday is going to be 50% off loose beads, pendants, and charms. No, the Nina charm or the spoopy charms are not going to be included in that, Corvus, or anyone else. So we do have new spoopy charms from that company that I love so much. The company that makes the bat burritos and the Ouija planchettes. I have all kinds of fun, cool new charms from them. Those are going to be on stream on Saturday. Those are not going to be on sale. Okay, so if you want them, get them at full price. And then
plus your discount, because most of you have one.
Plus discounts if you have them. But I'm going to say 50% discounts are non-applicable to these charms.
I think that's fair.
But other discounts are applicable. And Then Saturday it's going to be 25% off chain and findings. So we got 3 awesome sales for you next week on the Beading Dreams stream. And then the week after that, I'm going to be running away again. I know, 2 vacations within 3 weeks. Heather hasn't murdered me yet, but I think it's coming.
I'm going to be too tired to murder you.
To be fair, the one I'm taking in 2 weeks is one I've had planned for almost a year. The one last week was spur of the moment. Or relatively spur of the moment. But I promise that I won't be abandoning you again for a while.
How long is a while?
I don't know, actually. Do you hear the murdering in the face happening over there?
I'm not saying anything about face murdering.
Your tone of voice is.
I don't think so.
I do. I think your tone of voice says face murder.
Really?
Yes.
Well, that doesn't...
Well, not so much now, but before. Okay, so I have cleaned up. Now I'm going to stop tormenting Heather because I actually have something, to continue the tutorial. Alright, so I've cleaned up my bezels. Now, you could spend as much time on this as you wanted to. Obviously, I didn't spend enough time on that side. Goodness gracious. You could even go with sandpaper, like 320 grit, to smooth it down even more. I'm being a little bit cursory with this just because of, stream and time and all of that business. See, Corvus is with me. So I don't know if I should, be happy that Corvus is agreeing and gleeful about Heather murdering me, but I'm at least glad that she's with me.
Yeah.
Poor Heather. I make so much fun of her.
I just never thought I was a mean person until...
Well, I don't know. Is murdering someone in the face because they deserve it mean or just,
But who deserves
Yes.
murder in the face?
I don't know. Sometimes maybe me. Sometimes
No.
maybe other people.
I think other people much more quickly than you.
Okay, so now we're going to solder our bezels onto... That is fair. I did get Corvus new Ravens. And they are pretty badass.
They really are.
And she did leave some of them for the rest of you. So there will be new Ravens. Not a whole lot of them, but there will be some new Ravens on the stream on Saturday. Sterling Silver Raven Charms. Okay, so now I'm going to figure out what I did with that piece of wire, which is over here. And now I'm going to solder that onto the back of this bezel. And I'm going to do the same with my other bezels. So I need to flux it. And now I'm going to go to easy solder. So like I said, this is a little bit non-sequential, but it's because zipping that bezel is so difficult, and it's going to be really hard to accidentally unzip that bezel using the easy solder. So that's what we are going to do. We are going to figure out what the actual hell I did with my tweezers. There we go. So I'm going to take my solder, I'm going to put it on there, and then I'm going to take my wire, and I'm going to set it on there. And I want to make sure, once again, that I have good contact. Whether or not you have good contact is going to depend on a couple things. It's going to depend, first of all, on how wonky your solder board is. As you can see, mine is extremely wonky. At some point, I'm going to get a new solder board, and you guys are going to be like, what's that? What's that thing she's soldering on? It's so white.
It doesn't look like the surface of Mars at all.
Exactly. And then it's also going to depend on how your wire is curved. Now, I've got actually a little bit of curve in my wire that's working in my favor because I actually do have some solid contact here. So my solder's on the other side. You can't see it just because of the angle of the camera, but you will see when it flows. So I'm just going to heat this whole thing. There you go. See how my solder's trying to escape. No, escape. Get back there.
Yes.
And you may need to heat down your wire a bit as well because, of course, any part of your metal that's not being heated is acting as a heat sink, meaning it's pulling heat away from where you are heating, so you need to make sure that everything is nice and warm. and then concentrate on the, and there you go. Did you see that? And that's a cool thing that happens with solder, is that kind of suction effect, because you may have noticed not only did the solder flow underneath, but it actually pulled the bezel up into contact with the rest of the wire. Now that's not something you can count on happening. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's really, really neat. Now, second verse, same as the first. Bezel. Flex the bezel. Cut a piece of easy solder. Now we do have a metal lollipop, and interestingly enough, I mean, what we actually have in addition to a metal lollipop is we've got basically a giant metal head pin with a cabochon at the bottom. So you could absolutely take this, and if you were going to do this and put a bead on it, I would suggest something smaller than 14 gauge wire, obviously, but you could totally put a large bead on there, wire wrap the top, and have a really cool pendant with a bezel set cabochon at the bottom. Or it could be a metal lollipop. I am on board with either of these ideas. So I'm going to take that second piece of solder, I'm going to drop that on there. I'm going to put that wire on there. Like so. The second one is usually easier because you've got that first bezel that's kind of holding it up. You could also make it into a hairpin. Lori's not wrong. However, okay, if you were using a hairpin, I would recommend 12 gauge wire because the wire gets annealed when you solder it, when you heat it. And so even if you've got really fine hair like mine, sometimes the 14 gauge will bend going in. So if you want to make a hairpin like this, 12 gauge is going to be a better gauge for that. Alright, now we solder bezel number 2. So again, heat the whole thing. You're probably going to need to heat your wire. I got this one at a slightly better angle so you can hopefully see it flow. So when I'm trying to flow it, notice I'm concentrating my heat on the opposite side because I'm trying to pull it underneath my wire. Solder flows towards heat. There we go. And bingo. Alright, solder flows towards heat. So you always want to make the place where you want your solder to flow the hottest part of your project. Okay, so now we have a metal barbell, and this is going to go into the pickle. While it's pickling, I'm going to talk about what pickle is and what it does. Alright, pickle is a weak acid solution. What it does is it cleans off your metal, it cleans all of the black crud and everything off of your metal so that we can polish our metal, we can make it pretty to wear, or we can continue to work on it. As I said a couple minutes ago when I was talking about troubleshooting zipping your bezel, dirty metal will oftentimes inhibit the flow of your solder, and so cleaning your metal in between joints allows you to, sometimes work with more facility. Now, I'm not a very avid pickler, like the gal that taught me, amazing metalsmith. She pickled everything all the time. She pickled before she started, and then between each joint, and I'm like, oh my god, 70% of your project time is just waiting for things to pickle. So I don't do that much. I usually do it either at the end of the project or when I feel like my project is just getting too, dirty and my solder is not wanting to flow. And yes, do not eat the pickle. Corvus is not wrong. For anybody who wasn't here earlier when I said tomorrow, don't forget, is our Zoom Crafty Cocktail Hour. That means you will not find us on Facebook, you will not find us on Twitch, you will find us on Zoom doing crafty things. I have, like I said, a buttload of soldering, so I'm definitely going to be soldering tomorrow night. You can craft or not, however you want. You can just hang out with us. Wow, my third hand's a little limp.
Oh. It's better than your third leg being limp.
I guess so. But, yeah, so you can come, you can craft with us, you can hang out with us, you don't have to craft, you don't have to bead, you can also do other crafts. It's basically just a fun time.
You could just stare at us.
You could just stare at us, that's
It's a little
true,
creepy,
but maybe
we don't judge.
Maybe don't be too creepy about it.
Don't, lick your lips or anything.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's going to be tomorrow night on Zoom, starting at 6, running until 8. Of course, come whenever you want, leave whenever you want. It's very informal. But it's a good time. Also, I saw one of my old colleagues is doing the same thing. And she had a really interesting marketing twist on it, which is if you're stuck on a project and you need feedback or opinions, this is a really good forum for that as well. And also, of course, if you need help with something, because I'm going to be on, Heather's going to be on, between the two of us, we know a decent amount of things and can help you out of a fair amount of jams. Plus, I do run it through XSplit, so I've got my hand cam so I can demo things. So come join us. Tomorrow night on Zoom. If you've Zoomed with us before, the credentials are the same. If you've Zoomed with us before, you probably also received those credentials via email not that long ago this evening, because Heather sent it out because she's awesome. And if you've never Zoomed with us before and you want the link for that meeting, please email us, beadingdreamsdallas@gmail.com. We will be more than happy to send it to you. I don't post them up on social media anymore because we had a little bit of weirdness. But believe me, anybody who's watching this stream now, we'd be more than happy to have you on our Zoom. And if you don't have that information, again, email us, beadingdreamsdallas@gmail.com. And that's funny. Well, no, what's funny is Scott's computer is still set to Chicago weather. Because I looked down at the little weather thing in the corner, and it says 31 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm like, okay, I know it's cool, but it's not that cold here.
No.
So apparently in Chicago, it's 31 degrees.
It's 52 here.
It's 52 here, and in Edmonton, it is 24 Fahrenheit. So Edmonton is colder than Chicago, definitely colder than Dallas.
A meme I saw this past week was really awesome, and it said, if you look at Fahrenheit temperatures, they're how the human body feels. So if you think of 20 degrees, that's cold. If you think of 100 degrees, that's warm. And Celsius temperatures are how water feels.
Okay.
So if it's if it's 20 degrees for water, then it's
Okay then.
yeah. I think it was a good way of looking at it, as at least a shortcut.
This is true. Okay, so now we're going to take and polish this up. So I've got some fine steel wool, and I'm just going to scrub the surface. So what happens when this comes out of the pickle is it has a finish on the surface called pickle white. What pickle white is, it's not actually a residue or something that needs to be cleaned off. What it is it's actually a depletion gilded layer of fine silver that needs to be buffed in order to be shiny. And yes, of course, I'm whacking my camera because I always whack my camera. I think about moving my camera to my other side. As a right-handed person, if my camera was on my left, I feel like I would hit it less often. You can clean out the insides of your bezels if you want. I'm not going to because my stones are opaque. Also, if you have access to a tumbler, at this point, you could skip all of this hand buffing nonsense and put this piece in your tumbler with your steel shot and water. Tumble it for about, anywhere from 12 hours to a day. And she did make it cold. It was freezing when I got back.
It wasn't as cold as some days. Like, she didn't go well below 70.
Fair. Carol was also cold.
Yes, she definitely was.
Okay, so if you have access to a tumbler at this point, you'll put it in, tumble it for anywhere from 12 hours to a day, and take it out, and it's going to be nice and shiny without you having to do any of that work that I just did. But since we're trying to finish this on stream, we went the hard way. We buffed it by hand. And I'm going to take my bracelet mandrel, and I'm going to bend this around my mandrel. And do a little bit of shaping. Possibly a little bit of pounding this into submission.
You don't have to pound me into submission, you just need to ask.
Okay, but I need to pound this bracelet into submission.
Okay, that's fair.
Or tap it into submission is more.
That was more of a gentle tap.
More like what I'm doing. See, the bracelet knows that I'm on stream, and knows you all are watching. That's why it's being difficult. Alright, there we go. So this is actually a proper fit for me as a cuff, where I don't actually have to squeeze together the stones in order to get it to stay on. Like, that's how a cuff should actually fit. It should just kind of grip around the edges of your arm. This other one that I made, I actually have to, in order to get it to stay on my arm, I actually have to pull these together and then bend them down while it's on my wrist. And that's going to decrease the lifespan of your cuff by a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's two totally different looks, you know, the more wide set or the more narrow set. If you want the more narrow set, then go ahead and add a 1/2 inch of wire onto what I told you to cut. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to set our stones. So I'm going to grab, alright, which one of you is the chonky one?
Me?
No, not you. Alright, so I'm going to pop my little chonky guy in there. Make sure he goes all the way down. Ta-da! And then I'm just going to put this onto a flat surface like a bench block. And I'm going to use my prong pusher. See, again, this is one of those, like, if only I were left-handed, this would be a better setup. There we go. I'm going to use my prong pusher to push that bezel down around my stone. So the pusher just pushes the bezel in and down all the way around my stone. And it's a good idea to work in opposition, meaning I would do the bottom here, and then I would flip this over, and I would do the top. Really need to work on a better camera setup for this. So, sorry y'all. Going off the rails. Just because I can't get any leverage under there. So the motion I'm using is in and down, mostly down with my prong pusher. Okay, I'm trying to bend that bezel down over the curve of my stone to hold it in there. Okay, so there's one. Now I'm going to do the same with the other one, so pop my other scarab in there. This is my less chunky one. Make sure his little head's going the right way. Now, if there is any doubt at all that your stones are going to fit in these bezels, for the love of your own sanity, take a piece of dental floss, lay it across the bezel, then shove your stone in there, because if your stone is just too small, it'll fall right back out. The problem arises when your stone is just a little bit too big, or it gets stuck in there cattywampus, it gets stuck in there, you know, not level, and if it's really jammed in there, it can be literally impossible to get it out. So that dental floss allows you to pop your stone out and make whatever adjustments you need to the bezel, or pick a new stone. Yes, I've definitely done that on many occasions, or whatever you need to do. Now, if you get stuck in that oh shit moment and you haven't put your dental floss in, another trick, let me just go ahead and finish this one, and then I'll tell you about the trick. I'm not going to do it because my little buggy guys fit. Okay, this also kind of looks like toad eyes. The toads are haunting me, y'all.
You would know.
So the other trick, if you happen to get your stone stuck in your bezel and it won't come in, or it won't go in, it won't come out, you can take and drill a hole in the back of your bezel. And yes, you can do that with your stone in there. You just gotta, be careful. And then use an awl or something to try and push through that hole that you drilled and push your stone out. That's not ideal, of course, because then you have a rando hole in the back of your bracelet, but it's better than having a useless bezel with a stone stuck in it. So I could do a little bit more work on those, but once again, time and all of that. This one especially is a little bit lumpy. So the way you fix that is you just take, and you just keep going with your prong pusher around and around and around, and then you can also take a tool called a burnisher, and you can just run that around the edge of your bezel to give it like a nice final finish. But for now, we're going to call this my double bezel cuff bracelet. Very happy with the way that it fits, very happy with the way that it looks. So that's it for Torch Tuesday. Thank you all so much for playing our game. I'm Allison from Beading Dreams in Dallas, Texas. We are an actual brick and mortar retail bead store. You can find us on Lovers Lane in Dallas, and we are open for business Monday through Saturday from 1 p.m. until 6 p.m. Of course, you can also find us on this channel, twitch.tv. Thanks everyone, /Beading Dream 5 times a week typically with complimentary tutorials. We usually stream Wednesday through Saturday by Corvus at 6 p.m. Central Time, and Thursdays at noon, plus live merchandise sales every Wednesday and Saturday at 7:30 p.m. But tomorrow night, of course, we will not be on Facebook. We will not be on Twitch. We will be on Zoom from 6 to 8 doing Crafty Cocktail Hour. Come join us over there. And we'll be back on stream on Saturday with... Did I put it up there? Nope. Not that project. That's the project we just did. With our 5-drop necklace that was supposed to be, or sorry, not that was supposed to be, but our 5-drop necklace project. And then a live merchandise sale featuring new spoopy charms and more probably of those 8-inch gemstone strands. Plus, I've got a whole bunch of cool rando strandos, which is always a fun time. So, everyone have a great night. Have a wonderful Friday, and we'll see you all hopefully on Zoom tomorrow or back on this channel, twitch.tv /Beading Dreams, Saturday at 6.